I'm pleased to see people here. When you do public speaking, the first thing you worry about is technology. That's Mary's ballywick, and I presume it's gone well. Second is your voice. Mine was not here earlier this week, but it is back, so if I sip water or cough, bear with me. I actually always bring 2 pairs of pants to presentations because I have split a pair of pants coming out of the car to one. And then last but not least is that there are people here. So let's move into the ABCs of financial insurance planning. Mary asked me because I'm very humble, I guess, says he as he's saying that. My family's been in the financial world since 1954, so I do come by this honestly. My grandfather, his brother, his brother-in-law, his son-in-law, his nephew, and I was the last one to join, and I'm still the only one standing, which is awesome. So what I do when I meet with individuals or corporate entities is that I do a comprehensive financial plan for them, and I look at all the different stages of their life, and I don't focus on product. Mr. Malley mentioned that he also was more into the process than the products. There are tons of products that can meet the areas of problem, but that's not my focus. My focus is the process, and I work with families, and I basically facilitate communication as well. That's certainly not product. My experience in that goes back about 8 or 9 years now, where I'll sit with a family who, I mean, it used to be that, someone would have cancer, right? And nowadays it's someone wants to talk about money. Talking about money is very, very difficult. And often parents are scared to talk to kids, and kids are scared to sit down and say, what are we going to do when you die? And yet having a third party to facilitate that discussion is something that I've added to my practice over the last little while. Okay. And by the way, if you have questions, ask. Okay. Well, not you with the long-winded question. So we're going to talk about financial planning. We're going to talk about whether or not you're ever too old for insurance. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how to avoid probate. So, financial planning, what is it? Someone say, what do you think it is? What do you think financial planning is?
Me?
Yep.
Oh, financial planning is just making sure that everything's in order, so when the estate needs to be taken care of, that all the looking at all the investment, where everything was invested, the bank accounts and everything else is in order, so when you have all the information to proceed to proceed to go get the money out.
Okay, anyone else want to add to that? Go ahead.
Have enough money till the day before you die.
That would be, I think it's Jonathan Chevreau has a book, Findependence Day, which is speaking exactly to that. Any other comments? Well, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? In today's society, everyone and anyone in the financial world is calling themselves a financial planner. And the definition that I like to use is that it's the process by which one looks at their overall financial well-being, and be that a person or an entity, and they make sure that they have the money presently, which is lasting until the last day that you die, and until afterwards, making sure that it goes to the next generation. But that's not always what you're going to see. You're going to see someone who speaks only to investments, refer to themselves as a financial planner, only to insurance, only to cash flow management. Financial planning really does involve all of those areas. Case in point, the diagram that I use all the time, I look at 5 areas. In the very middle is cash flow planning. Why is it there? Because if you have a negative cash flow, we want to make it positive. If you have a positive cash flow, is it as positive as we can make it? And a lot of advisors spend 5 seconds there. When you go to write a check, will that bounce? I mean, they won't ask that of you, but that's what they're looking spending a lot of time in the cash flow area, independent of what stage of life you're at, is incredibly important. Then we look at insurance planning. And in the insurance side of things, we make sure we're protecting the cash flow so that if someone ends up going into a long-term care facility, have they got enough money to survive? Because believe it or not, OHIP doesn't cover everything. Then we look at tax planning, and my attitude, and I think I'll allude to this again, it's okay to pay tax. It means you made an income, but it's not okay to give the government a tip. Their service stinks, and so we're going to make sure that we don't tip them unnecessarily. Investment planning is also very important. What should you be doing? RSP, TFSA, ABC, DEF. The financial world talks in acronyms, and most people don't understand most of them. So we try and take the rocket science and make it really easy for you. And then legal and estate planning. I imagine that you have had a few people talk in that arena, and that's working with lawyers, working with accountants to make sure that things transfer and are set up properly at this point in time. Okay, so far so good. No one's yawning. Good. These lights are great because I can't see all of you. Okay, so the question that then begs itself, now that we've determined what financial planning is, that one component, the insurance. Are you too old for insurance? And if you sat in front of an insurance salesperson, they would say never. There may be times where you are too old for insurance, but what you have to think about and what you need to do is ask yourself, if you needed help, i.e. you cannot brush your teeth, you cannot dress yourself, who's paying for it? If anyone knows the service out there called Nurse Next Door, you may see their pink cars driving around. They're individuals that come in and do that. You've got the old Victorian nursing entities that go around. But all of that comes with a cost. And if you haven't had a family member who has required ongoing care, then you're probably unaware of the expense, but it can end up costing many thousands of dollars a month, and you want to make sure that you've done your planning on that. So, individual insurance. How are you paying for your funeral? How are you paying for the other final expenses? The probate. I love the new acronym. It's EAT or EAT. Okay, that is just so appropriate for the government to be calling it that. And so the case then becomes, how do you best afford that? And life insurance is generally, presuming that you're in good health, the least expensive way to address that. The next thing is, do you have redundant assets? And I ask that because a lot of people say, ooh, insurance, go away. Trust me, my grandfather and I used to sit in our family gatherings off in the corner and no one would come near us because we were talking about insurance. Suffice it to say that if you have money sitting there that you're intending for the next generation and all you're doing is turning it over in investments, you're probably best to look at insurance because the rate of return on that death benefit being tax-free may be very, very profound. So that's one other area that some of you may not have considered with respect to insurance. Cost of insurance. So I'm going to use an example here. We have a male and a female, age 65. They need $100,000 of life insurance. It's going to pay out what's called second to die. That means that the husband and wife, first death, nothing is paid out. But at the second death, the $100,000 pays out. And this may be to address such things as the taxation on registered assets, because it's more cost effective to pay an insurance company $1,959 a year than it is to pay a couple of $100,000 potentially to the government. No one likes to pay government. Remember, we don't want to tip them. Okay. So in that situation, if one of the individuals lives to age 80, the other one predeceases that, the rate of return on insurance is 23.707%. I don't know about you, but I don't know many places that you can get 23% guaranteed unless, I mean, obviously if you die, you have to do that first, and we all want to live. So let's say that one of the individuals lives to age 90. In that case, the rate of return becomes 8.41%. And more people are living past the century mark, one of them lives to age 100, it's still 3.17% rate of return on that $1,959 a year. Okay? So before you negate insurance and say, I don't need it anymore, you might speak with an insurance person to determine if you do. Any questions? No? Go ahead.
Does that mean the premium's paid off on the first death?
There are policies that allow for the premium. This one was paid to the second death, the numbers that I'm quoting. The one where it would stop at the death of the first person, the premiums are going to be higher. Obviously, you take a look at the capability of the second individual to continue the payments versus having it stop if the primary breadwinner were to pass away. Okay? Does that answer? Great. Any other questions on it? No? Good. Okay. See, I've got my work cut out, right? Because it's nice and sunny. And you guys have been sitting here for a while, so I just want to make sure you're not sleeping. So, how to protect your investments? First and foremost, communication. There's a book by Tom Deans, talks about transferring a business to the next generation. His philosophy is that you should sell it to the next generation. And the reason that's his philosophy is that if you own a business and you have 3 kids, one involved, 2 who aren't, the one who's involved may be just waiting until you die to sell the business. The one of the 2 who's not is going to buy the business. You don't know that if you haven't spoken about it. And as I said at the beginning, that's something that I've started to really delve into in the last 8 years. Why? Because people generally don't talk about it. Second thing is tax. It's not easy to avoid tax. It's even more difficult to evade it. Myself, Mr. O'Malley, and the other individuals today probably haven't been talking about evading. That would put us in jail. But avoiding is important. And so often you get situations whereby people will do things prematurely, such as if you have a cottage and a principal residence, putting the cottage into joint ownership with a child. That is wonderful, except you are creating a whole pile of potential issues. We'll talk about that in a second. And as I said, the estate administration tax, most of us colloquially know it as probate, and it changed, I want to say it was 4 years ago, to be deemed the estate administration tax. Is that?
January 1st, 2015.
Okay, there you go. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. So, communication with your family. The first thing that everyone should have is an up-to-date will and power of attorney. In the many decades that I've been doing this, I know I look much younger, suffice it to say that one of the things that I ask when I meet with people is, let me see your will. I cannot tell you how many times I've read through the will and asked why, if you die, is your sister going to take over everything, and why if you die your husband's going to take over everything, or vice versa. In other words, they're not mirror wills, but the people think that they are. And so make sure, because no offense to the lawyers, they don't always get it right the first time around. So you better make sure that you read the document as opposed to say, thank you very much, you've signed for it, and stick it in a drawer, and when it comes out full of dust and it's being reviewed, it's different. So always read the documents. Second thing is, use a love letter. Has anyone here written a love letter that accompanies their will? Okay. Love letter says, Dear Brian, I'm gone. This is why I love you. This is why I'm doing everything. It's not part of the will, because it's not legal, but it is an explanation of what my desire is. So with my 2 sons, I've written a love letter that basically says I've disowned you for, no, I'm just kidding. Here's why I'm doing what I'm doing. Here's what I would hope that you would do. And it's justifying why things in my will are the way they are. Same thing with power of attorney. If you have someone who's going to take over and administer to you, if you're not able to vocalize things, they may not know Do they or don't they pull the plug? Do they or don't they resuscitate you? So power of attorney is incredibly important. You would be amazed how many emergency individuals have tattooed now on their chest DNR, which is do not resuscitate. So if you haven't spoken to your significant other or to your power of attorney, then you might want to convey to them, don't resuscitate me, don't use heroic efforts, or do resuscitate me, do use heroic efforts. It's not something that you generally do at Thanksgiving, so you've missed that opportunity. You probably won't do it come the holiday festivities, but it is still something that you should be doing. The other thing is, if you haven't done so already, sit down with the family and say, hey, here are my wishes. Are you guys agreeable to it? If you're not able to do that, then hire a third party who can become the facilitator for that. And there are tons of people out there like myself who do work in that arena. But what's going to happen is that you may not be aware of what your kids want. You may be very surprised at what they want. I know to anyone who's a parent, that probably is a rhetorical statement because they surprise you every day, but talk to them. Because they may, and make it a no holds barred, no hard feelings, no nothing. At camp, we used to call it a BS session. Okay. By the way, my logo, it's BS. It's the only place you get BS from me. Okay. And if you're laughing, then you can come and talk to me anytime. Okay.
No charge?
No charge. Just to talk. Okay. All kidding aside, ladies and gentlemen, sit down with your family, sit down with the powers of attorney, sit down with the executors, sit down with guardians for kids, grandkids, etc., and make sure that everyone is on the same page. Because if they're not, then you know it now and you can maybe take some steps to avoid some issues, such as putting the cantankerous sister as an executor, right? So that family, Mr. O'Malley's family, obviously did some prep work and put some thought into it. That is an anomaly. That is the exception to the rule. You would be amazed how many times people fight. And that's the last point, which is assume that your heirs are going to fight. To quote my grandfather, money has no friends and no relatives. Okay, and in 30 years of doing this, I have seen that come to fruition far too many times.
Can I ask, when you
Please.
have a DNR situation, do they need to see paperwork? Let's say the emergency crew, whatever, do you need to show them a written paper saying they don't want that?
Your power of attorney, if you're not capable, obviously you aren't if you're asking that question, your power of attorney should have already been consulted with that. You could have been consulted prior to whatever the event that caused you to be. If all it is a tattoo on it, they're going to hesitate, and that hesitation may allow them to find the right person. Okay, it is certainly not a legal document across your chest, though. Okay. Any other questions? Sorry?
So you might as well have your power of attorney on the wall. Some people do that now, they keep it on their fridge.
Speaking.
If something happens, they know it's written right there.
Yep. Speaking of power of attorney and that kind of stuff, one of the things that I think has become so incredibly important for all individuals is an electronic will. Okay, and what I mean by that is, if you weren't here today, who's going to know all of your passwords? Most people have no idea. Why? Because guess what? You may have something that's online that renews online and is paid through the bank, and someone may not even know that. But if you list the sites that you use and the passwords, then you can shut things down if need be. Okay? So definitely take some time, do it on a piece of paper, don't put it in your safety deposit box, because and presume, like your power of attorney, don't put that in your safety deposit box, because how's the person going to get inside of it? Okay, that was a situation that I came into where a husband had put his power of attorney into the safety deposit box, and the wife had to jump through hoops to finally get access to it. Okay, all right, great question. Anything else? No? Good. Okay, so protecting your investments. It's okay to pay tax. As I said, don't give the government a tip. Plan now for then. And what I mean by that is, instead of being surprised by someone's estate, those who survive them, know what the tax liabilities are going to look like. Because guess what, ladies and gentlemen? You can transfer a registered asset from a deceased spouse to a living spouse, but you can't transfer a registered asset unless you have an infirm dependent from a parent to a child without it being deemed to have been disposed. And when it's disposed, it's as though the day before you died, you sold everything you owned. And so all of that comes into play. The government will give you 6 months or the following April 30th to file that tax return. And so you can see, and I've seen it more than once, where children, often referred to as waiters, are sitting there waiting for the parents to die to get the money, and they suddenly have to come up with the tax liability, and Revenue Canada will go after them if they need to for it. The other thing is, don't be afraid to make donations in your estate. In today's world, the government is paring back on what they give to charities, and leaving old insurance policies that you don't need some money to charities can also be a great tool that you can use both in your estate when you've passed away as well as prior to that, and then using insurance to offset costs. Okay? Everyone good? Okay. I haven't told a joke lately, so you don't need to laugh. Okay. So how to avoid the good old EAT, also known as probate. First of all, be very careful with joint ownership of items. I sat down yesterday afternoon with a couple in their 40s. His father had just passed away, and he was lamenting the fact that he had suggested to his father that they put his house into joint ownership. And I said, that may not have been such a brilliant idea. I said to this gentleman, you own a house? He goes, yes, I do. I said, so if you had 10 years ago put your dad's principal residence into joint ownership, you would have saved yourself probate, or EAT, which is 1.5% over the first $50,000. But you, speaking to the son, would have started to incur capital gains from the date that it went into joint ownership. When it comes to cottages or secondary properties or non-registered portfolios, often what happens is the probate tail wags the probate dog. In other words, when you go to put things into joint ownership, you have to be conscious if there's a disposition of the primary asset in question. So if you have a cottage and you decide you're going to save the world or save the kids from arguments, and you're going to put every single one of them on as a joint owner, you're in essence selling it from yourself to yourself and all your kids. That's a deemed disposition. It triggers capital gains tax. Usually paying capital gains tax or any tax prematurely is generally not something that I advise, unless you think that we're about to implement an estate tax on everything. Then maybe, okay? But I generally don't recommend it. The other thing is that in today's world, unfortunately, people go bankrupt more regularly than they once did. If I owned a cottage or house and my son was on as my joint owner and he goes bankrupt, well, my house is part of that bankrupt estate. And so therefore, either I'm going to be required to offset that cost. Actually, he will be, but he's not going to have money at the time. But it endangers where I'm living. Same thing when it comes to marital breakdown. And although you might not believe it, upwards of 50+% of marriages end in divorce. I have 2. I make up for those who are still married. Okay? I finally did it right, though, and I married a childhood sweetheart. Suffice it to say that if I was joint owner with my principal residence with my son, and he goes through a matrimonial breakdown, my house becomes part of his assets. And therefore, it means that the equalization is favoring the soon-to-be ex-wife at the disadvantage of my son, let alone the fact that if I've mortgaged it to the hilt, we may have to liquidate to get the excess equity inside of that house. That's not generally what people want to do. So be very, very careful with ownership of items. It's interesting, I think it was 2 days ago, I was reading about an individual in Scandinavia who says that it's a good idea to do the Swedish death cleanup, I think is what she referred to it. Is that the correct term? I see Mary shaking her head. Basically what it is, and I'm a pack rat, so over the years I've accumulated a lot of junk. My kids, I assure you, have no use for some of the junk that I have. So if I want to make their life easier when I croak, maybe I should get rid of some of that. We have Kijiji. We have neighborhood garage sales. We have all that kind of stuff. If it's not going to be something that you're sure your kids want, maybe you should get rid of it. Because in today's world, unlike in the past, most people don't use china. Okay? And many people have beautiful china sets. If you don't want it and the price is right, talk to me. I'm happy to take it. But all kidding aside, that may be something that gets cleaned out. Is that a question or an itch?
Itch.
Okay. I just saw the arms start to raise. Okay. Now, this, Mr. Malley and I both disagree on the treatment. When you have an investment outside of an insurance company, so I'm alluding to banks and mutual funds here, my understanding is that at the death of the survivor, if it's spousal, or at the death of the individual, if it's just one person, that money flows into probate, even if there's a named beneficiary. And what that means is it becomes public, as Mr. Malley did allude to, but it also means that it is subject to probate, and that can be unnecessary. If you use an insurance company, those assets definitively agreed bypass the estate?
Just to clarify, we're talking registered funds versus non-registered.
I'm talking all assets, but specifically because you raised it, the registered component.
Sorry, what did your question?
If you have any assets, registered or otherwise, invested with an insurance company, you avoid probate.
Normally, if they're segregated funds.
Segregated, even the GICs, as long as you have a named beneficiary other than your estate. Okay, good.
Definitely.
Okay, so when you're looking at your overall wealth and you're looking at the places that you have investments, you want to make sure that you can do things that don't cost you initially to provide later on. And that avoidance of probate is very important as long as you're not doing things in a naive way by putting houses, etc., into joint ownership. So if you have assets, my recommendation for non-registered definitively and questioning whether the registered as well, it would be better from an estate planning standpoint to have that inside of an insurance company. Okay?
So are you talking about things like stocks?
Stocks, the insurance company, the only way you can own stock with an insurance company is through a mutual fund or a segregated fund. Individual stocks, you have to go through a stockbroker or a discount brokerage firm.
No, I'm not talking about purchasing them.
You're talking about stocks in the insurance company?
Can you take your stocks, let's say I had 100 stocks of ABC company, can I buy an insurance policy for those stocks so that I don't pay taxes on them?
No. You can buy an insurance policy to accommodate for the tax liability, but the government will still look at those for tax. In fact, so will a mutual fund. If you put it into an insurance company, it becomes a segregated fund. The tax is still owing, but the probate is not. Okay? Any other questions on that? Nope? Okay, great. So, one of the things, and again, we're going to talk non-registered only, okay? So, what you have is someone passes away, they have a $750,000 estate, okay, of investments. First, you've got market loss potential. When you have an investment, a mutual fund, not stocks, Mary, but a mutual fund, with a mutual fund company, you're going to end up, if you're paying on a deferred sales charge in the first X number of years, they will charge that fee for you. And that fee is going to range somewhere between 5 and 10%. Okay? Sorry, that's the market loss. I'm talking the next one down. My apologies. Okay? Between 0 and 5.5%, that will get charged if it's held outside of an insurance company. So with an insurance company, there's no DSC fees at death. The market loss, you have exposure of about 5 business days. So if you have the investment in an insurance company, within 5 to 10 business days, that money is going to be transferred to the named beneficiary. Whereas if you have it held in a bank or you have it held, with a fund company, that money, generally you have to have a probated will. And today, the process takes 6 months, but you have about a 6-month wait because the government is not on top of it. So what I've heard recently is upwards of a year to probate a will. And that's a simple will. The minute that you get complex, it goes even longer. You're shaking your head?
No, I'm saying it's unbelievable, they're slow.
Mm-hmm.
That's fast.
Really?
Yep.
Wow.
Okay. So you've got market loss potential because if you died in June of 2008 and your will was probated in January of 2009, it wouldn't be 10% or 5%. It'd be closer to 40, potentially, depending on how risky you were. Probate fees. So you've got outside of an insurance company, you incur probate. Inside of an insurance company, you don't incur probate. Okay? That, by the way, is right from Sun Life slides. So legal and accounting fees. Legal and accounting fees can add up to about 6% of your estate, depending on the size of the estate. And so you want to be able to avoid things flowing through your estate, such as your investments, if you can. Mr. Malley, did you have a question?
No, sorry.
Can I take a picture of the screen?
You most certainly can. I will also give you my business card, and I'm happy to send the whole slide deck to you. They're my cue cards, so I could present this tomorrow and it'd be totally different. Okay? So, executor fees. An executor has the right in Ontario to charge up to 5%. Now, that does not mean that your spouse is going to charge your estate 5%. But you can certainly see where if you have a third party, they are apt to charge that amount of money. Time to probate, 6 months to a year plus. Privacy, a will is a public document, as Mr. O'Malley was alluding to, whereas bypassing the estate using an insurance company, it's private. Total potential cost, you've got a situation where over $100,000 plus time can come out of your portfolio if it's with a non-insurance company. $0 plus about a week if it's inside of an insurance company. Did you have any questions on that?
So that means that if you have GICs and all your investments through a financial company, how do you go about putting it into an insurance company? How does that work?
You use an advisor, or you speak directly to the company, and registered assets will be transferred without it going into your hands, right? Because if you take it into your hands, you pay tax on it.
Right.
So it bypasses you from one institution to another. If it's non-registered, You have to be very careful doing that because you may trigger capital gains. So you have to be conscious of the tax liability potentially, depending on the assets. If they're GICs, a lot of institutions won't allow you to liquidate mid-term. So you may have to wait till the end of the term. But it's really as simple as calling the company and saying, I need someone to help. Okay?
And the other thing to keep in mind is on there, you can have the executor who gets to charge their fees. So when my mom and dad died, my sister and I, we did take that 5% because we worked hard for it. And my siblings said, good, take that, but we did because
Yeah.
we worked really
A lot of
hard.
work, yeah.
So we took that. And in certain situations, the lawyer who helps you settle your estate, he can charge part of that as well as the accountant. So there is a big chunk that can come out. So people say it's only just 1.5% of your estate. Well, it's not, because if you start adding up all these people who get paid for their services, it comes off the top, is my understanding, before it gets divided up
Yep.
amongst everybody. So there could be a big chunk that comes off, and you need to think about that. So if mom's estate is worth $1 million and there's 4 of us, well, you're each not gonna get $250,000 because all these people get paid first. That's how I understand it.
Piggybacking on that, the other thing that, as a parent, and I presume there are parents in this room, you want to treat your kids equally. The number of times that I've seen wills and or being party to helping wrap up estates where one child gets the RSP proceeds and the other child gets business or gets the cottage or the house, understand that there's tax liabilities in there, and there may be differential tax liabilities. There may be differential risks because your business may not always be generating a lot of money versus the fixed asset of the registered investments. The registered investments, you take the total amount that you have in RSPs. The day that you die, you're deemed to have sold them the day before. That means if you have $500,000, your spouse has predeceased you, you now have $500,000, which is both of yours, and you pass away, congratulations, in the year of death, you made $500,000. I don't know about you, but that's not going to be at the lowest marginal tax rate. That's going to be at the highest marginal tax rate. And so you're going to have a situation where your estate, the intention is to leave it equally to your children, but by leaving differentially the assets, you may actually be negatively impacting one or more of your kids. So be very aware of that as well. Okay? Good, as Don Cherry says, not John Derry. Okay? So that's my contact information. I've got business cards as well. I'm going to open up the floor to questions. Fire away. I'm happy to answer any and all. And in the event that you have a question that you feel is the proverbial stupid question, let me suggest to you that the only stupid question is the one that doesn't get asked. If it's a private question, different story. I'm happy to assist in that. I'll stick around for 5 minutes. It's too late to go play golf. Any questions?
If someone has, say, mutual funds outside of an insurance company, who wants to retain those investments in those particular funds, is there a way to move them inside of an insurance company?
You're talking about a self-directed portfolio, basically.
Well, just say it's not self-directed, but say a person has bought funds through an investment advisor, and they're with ABC, mutual fund company.
Let's say Fidelity, because it's a huge company.
Sure. And now they want to move them inside an insurance company. Can they be held inside of an insurance company to get those benefits?
It depends on whether or not there is the exact same fund inside of an insurance company. And for the most part, there is not.
So it would have to be the insurance company's version of that mutual fund.
Yes.
So, it might be a U.S. large cap, but it's their version of the U.S. large cap. So you may
Yes.
not necessarily be getting the exact fund manager if that's important to you or not.
No. However, there are a number of funds that are out there that have an insurance company wrapper put around them.
That are
So
managed by?
that are basically Manulife gives Fidelity their Canadian Asset Allocation Fund as an example. They give them the money and then it's invested. And, okay, so it really depends on the funds that you're holding as to whether they can be transferred in kind or whether they have to be transferred in cash. Okay, and that's why I said be very careful, as I was alluding, to liquidation in order to gain that money. Take that into consideration when, sorry, to gain the insurance company, take it into consideration when you're cashing in to move, okay? Cashing in within the registered environment to move registered, or cashing in non-registered and then writing an equivalent check. Okay? Great question though. The insurance company, the other thing is that they tend to, their fees, their management fees, I mean, we're all hearing about it on the radio and the news these days. Their fees are not as dramatically higher as they once were. In fact, in some instances, you could have the Fidelity Canadian Asset Allocation Fund and it's less expensive in the insurance company.
It's the identical fund.
Identical fund. But they've got a better rate, and if you have enough money invested with them, you're actually going to be able to come in below the same management costs. Okay?
Sorry, can I just add to that? How about
Please.
ETFs? Does the insurance companies get involved in ETFs?
There are a few companies that do ETFs. My personal opinion on ETFs is be very careful, because you've got a situation where it's a passive investment. So you're going to partake 100% in the up market, 100% in the down market, right? And guess what? ETFs became very much in vogue. We haven't had a market downturn during that period of time. So the ETF is based on their logarithmic calculation.
It's an index, right?
It is, but it can be manipulated in certain ways. So then it goes from passive to active. But let's look at a situation. Let's assume that there's $100 billion in the market. 50 billion of it is in ETFs. If the market starts to drop, how many of the holders of those ETFs are experienced investors? And how many of them are individuals who will just simply call their broker up and say, I want out, put a market sell on it. And so what the broker does is they put a market sell, which means whatever the asking price is irrelevant. It's whatever the person is prepared to buy. And you'll have large institutions come in and say, ha ha, and they'll do a 20% discount to it, and the whole pot will get sold. By the end of the day, it may come back up. And over a period of time, you're apt to see a significant decline as a result of it. So I would be very, very careful with ETFs. But in response to your question, there are some ETFs. BMO Insurance has ETFs. Okay, there you're going to pay a little bit more than you would for the actual BMO funds, the ETF funds that they have.
And they would have the same kind of protection that you alluded to
Yes.
earlier. Yeah, that was really where I was going with that question.
Okay, sorry to jump.
But no, I like the explanation anyway.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. On a parting note, and Mary and I were actually talking about this, if you don't have long-term care insurance, if you don't have a clue what long-term care insurance is, please learn about it. It's basically, if you cannot do 2 or more of your normal activities of daily living, you get a monthly income from the insurance company. And everyone thinks, oh, I have to be institutionalized for that to occur. The answer is absolutely not. Because anyone in here who suffers from arthritis may tell you that it's very difficult to get dressed, may tell you that it's very difficult to wash their hair. I don't have that problem. But that would be 2 activities of daily living. May be very difficult to hold a fork and cut your meat. That's an activity of daily living. If you have 2 or more of those that are impaired, then you may very well qualify for a monthly income stream so that someone can come in at your expense every day and give you a bath, for example, or dress you, and not necessarily left up to the caregiving spouse. Mary, I'll give it all back to you.